I think you had a little boy in 1973, and I think it was me. Baby, you're right. I'm your mom. I've been praying for you every single night. An acting out child is a stressed out child. The
Yeah.
adopted child and the foster child are probably two of the most understood populations that exist.
Hi, Louise.
Hi, Sarah.
Well, we are here just a few more chapters after this one for The Adoption Paradox, Putting Adoption in Perspective by Jean Kelly Woodner. We are on chapter 25, Roadmaps to More Satisfying Reunions.
I'm going through a reunion, so I was like, what is it going to tell me? I need to know. I still feel unprepared. Let's see. The quote that we always read is, I want people to be told this isn't what you think it is. This is like a bomb. There's so much debris inside, dangerous debris that needs to be respected and managed carefully. Catherine Vogely. That's pretty interesting. That's strong, right?
Yeah. I like this is a whole chapter about reunion.
Yes.
And she talks about, there's so many hopes and expectations and all the things. And then she gets into the statistics. Some
Yeah.
report that after 8 years, slightly over 50% of the study participants are still actively in contact. Another cited that 25% of the relationships failed. In one US study, while roughly 70% of these relationships remained in either regular or occasional long-term contact, 17% of them terminated their relationships immediately after the first meeting.
Oof.
The only thing that all of these studies agree on is that the emotions involved are highly charged and great care is needed to make them successful.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
And we know this from ourselves, from everybody we've talked to. It is not, and it's not one thing. There's so many complications with it, right? It's,
Well, and
yeah,
also
yeah,
kind of the first mothers kind of regress back to
yeah,
the age that they were when they relinquished, and the
yeah,
adoptee kind of reverts to being a baby that was left. So there's all these
yeah. All these things.
complicated feelings and
They're not, yeah.
emotions that are not even really known, feelings that are buried and
Oh, and
not
everybody,
even able to identify.
exactly. It made me think, actually, someone asked me recently, you're so close to your biological mom's side. That's so rare. And I said, I honestly think part of that's because my biological mom didn't find me. She wasn't alive. And I told my aunt that, like, and not in a negative way, but this may not have all happened if she were alive. Because she and I may have not done well, right? Or
Yeah,
you don't know.
hard to know.
Hard to know that because people do have complicated feelings about it, and adoptees get mad, and then they're like, "Oh, it's scary because you're not a cute baby that's excited to some
Well,
feelings."
and I mean, I know I've talked so much about it, so I don't want to like constantly repeat myself, but I had that, because I hadn't done the work yet.
Yes.
It was many years before we started our podcast, so I just kept her
Boy.
my first mother at an arm's length, not with my
Oh,
siblings. Like
yeah, because
them,
they're
I,
interesting.
it was kind of loved at first glance, but
Yeah,
um,
that's not so. One thing that after you read the statistics, I thought that kind of counteracts exactly what the public thinks is the happy reunion. That's mostly what people know about adoption reunion is the
mhm.
Hallmark TV reunions, and that's in
There
everybody's
were
head.
there were a lot of personal stories in here, and
Yes.
one of them was a woman named Pam, which I thought I I I was
Oh
like,
yeah.
surely she must. I think the loyalty to the adoptive parents was so strong that Pam wasn't even in touch with any
No.
feelings. In fact, she did finally kind of say at the end of her story, like, if my adoptive mother hadn't been
Was
alive. But
yeah.
she even said in this part of the story, like she didn't feel any connection to her, didn't feel like her daughter. Then
Nothing.
she even went so far as to say, I'll be honest with you, I don't remember her name anymore.
That was surprising
Like,
to me.
what?
I have to find it somewhere in the paperwork. I'm like, what? How do you not remember the
This
name?
is just an adoptee being completely shut down
Yeah.
and
Uh-huh.
loyal to the
Yeah.
adoptive parents. It's
It's
sometimes the loyalty borders on pathology because,
oh, it does. It
you
does for
know,
sure. I
yeah,
could think of a few people that I won't say it publicly that, famous people that
right.
have that. There was another person that said that really struck me because it was like she felt like she was cheating. It was a he. Felt like he
Yeah.
was having an affair, and I felt like that. I went through like the affair thing, like I'm cheating. I have such guilt, and now it's so insane to think about it. I wish I had known all this. I would have handled it better
I know.
on both sides.
Same.
Because people get older, you're missing the relationships that could happen.
Well, and that, right, there's the stages of reunion:
Yeah.
excitement, obsession, confusion, figuring
Uh-huh.
it out, and acceptance.
Yeah.
Um, the one thing, because this is kind of a chapter you have to read. It's all about
The stories.
the stories.
Yeah.
But I did like that Jeanette Yaff.
Oh, yeah. We just interviewed her
Did I
recently.
say your name right, Jeanette? I'm sorry if I
did.
didn't. She has worked on, so she's part of the Celia Center in Los Angeles, a nonprofit community center supporting those in foster care and all members of the Adoption Constellation.
Mhm.
And she talks about beginning with a few key stipulations that need to be agreed to up front.
Love this.
Everyone's been victimized. Everyone has experienced loss. Each person's loss is incomparable. Everyone will make mistakes and practice forgiveness over and over. But she goes through, this is
Yeah.
so
The
great,
framework.
the
Yeah.
framework. So have empathy, ask
Ask permission.
permission. So both of
Yep.
all parties,
Yeah,
right?
don't assume. Ask permission. So someone feels they've validated it. Yeah.
Yep.
Create a level of contact. Neither party has the right to control the contact.
Mm-hmm.
Share
Share your
stories.
stories.
Yep.
So provide space to both of you share stories.
That's right. Because sometimes
Yeah.
it's very one way. Be responsible
Yeah.
for your own healing.
Respect the relationship.
Yeah. And shifting with others. And
Sharing with others.
sharing with others.
Yeah, because secrets hurt. So
Yeah.
don't. And then recognition of your trust tree. So respect the loved ones closest to you and the other relationships that are
Yeah.
essential to your lives.
Yeah.
So that's a great framework.
It's great. It's actually like a little manual that I wish I had, didn't you?
Yeah.
To kind of remind yourself. And Jeanette, by the way, was on our podcast.
Yep.
And she named the Celia Center after her mother, her bio mother. And she had hard stuff with that. So she knows what she's talking about.
She does great work.
Yeah.
So anyway, that a lot of stuff in here.
Here's
Behooves you
one
to
thing.
read the book.
I like this for you and I at the end. This woman, Ray, said, it's about her reunion. It had been very healing. But someone said to her, you did change after your reunion. You became more sure of yourself.
I like that.
Because I think we both talked about, just between ourselves as friends, even like knowing who you are is everything.
Mm-hmm.
It does ground you more. Even if we always tell people that it can be scary. It doesn't have to be. It may not be an amazing, loving story, but you also know who you are.
Right. You get some answers at any rate. So
yeah. And then don't forget their name. I mean, that's just shocking to me.
Yeah. That just to me seemed
shut down.
Deeply fogged, I mean, it's a spectrum, right? Adoption is a spectrum.
That's the far end of that spectrum.
Yeah. Woo boy. All right. Well, I will see you in a minute for Bryan.
See you in a minute for Bryan.
Today we have someone coming to us from Brock, Texas. Welcome, Bryan. Happy to have you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Welcome, Bryan. Nice to see you. It's been a long time. Yeah, you have some cool stuff. We're excited to hear about it. So,
awesome.
Yeah. Tell us your story, however you want to jump in.
Well, I can start from the beginning. I was conceived by a mother out of wedlock. She was married and she had 3 children. So I have 3 half siblings. Her spouse was in the military and in Germany, and she didn't think he was coming back. And so she ended up falling in love with my biological father, and she got pregnant. And then he went across town and got a family friend pregnant, which broke her heart. And she knew that she did not want to be a single mom with 4 kids in Muskogee, Oklahoma in the 1970s. Right. So Merle Haggard wrote a song called Okie from Muskogee. So I always tell people I'm an Okie from Muskogee.
Truly, and you truly.
So yeah, truly, truly. And so she let her husband know that she had gotten pregnant. He said, "You have to have an abortion." And so she said, "Okay." And she didn't, because he was obviously, she did not. And when I found her 37 years later, and I called her, I said, "I think you had a little boy in 1973, and I think it was me." She said, "Who is this? How'd you get my number?" And then I said, "Well, I'm not a crackhead. I don't want anything. I'd just like to know a little bit about myself." And she said, "Let me call you back tomorrow." And I said, "Okay." And so we hung up. And then she called me back 30 minutes later. She said, "Baby, you're right. I'm your mom. I had to tell my husband." So she was still married to the same man. So the only two people that knew I existed was my biological mother and her oldest sister, my Aunt Gloria, who's since passed away. But she said, "I've been praying for you every single night."
Oh,
And um, when we finally got together, her husband was the first person out the door as I was coming across the yard. He gave me a big hug and he said, "I'm so
Mm.
sorry." He said, "I hope you can forgive me. I just couldn't bear another man's burden." And there's nothing to forgive. My life has been perfectly scripted for what it is that I do. And so once my biological mother, her name's Wilma, once we sat down together, she said that she had always enjoyed being pregnant. And she said, "I love being pregnant." Those were her exact words. She said, "I didn't smoke, I didn't drink, I ate the right foods, I got plenty of rest. I just love being pregnant." And, as a mental health professional, intuitively, I knew that I had had a good in utero experience. And I asked her, I said, "At what point in the pregnancy?" Because also as a mental health professional, I have found that the in utero period, which is something that science does not recognize enough, it is a part of the blueprints for all of your future social and emotional relationships. So everything the biological mother experiences in utero, the fetus not only receives but stores in the brainstem. So all of that goes into the early wiring of how you view social and emotional relationships for the rest of your life. The decade of the brain, neuroscience says from conception to five, our brain develops 97% of the time, 97% its maximum capacity. And Nadine Burke Harris, who wrote The Deepest Well, said that in the first year of your life, you're developing 1 million neural connections per second. So the
mm,
brain is exploding from conception to that first year. And John Bowlby was the first to say it in the 60s. He said your first 3 years of life establish the blueprints for all your future social and emotional relationships. So we discount how important that early in utero experience is. And so she said, I said, "When did you know that you could not keep me?" And she said, "At about the seventh month." She said, "At the seventh month, I had to try to pretend that you weren't there." And I had always believed, and I've done a lot of very deep emotional work over the years. It's kind of one of the things I've built most of my reputation in working with children and families around. I had always believed that the actual birth process was the biggest source of trauma in my life. Like it was the foundational experience, not the in utero experience. I always felt that was good. So I share that because, and now she and I have a great relationship, get along with her husband just fine. I call him Pops. But my parents, the parents who adopted me, I was in a couple foster placements and then I was adopted. They're the ones I refer to as my parents. My father
mm,
passed away almost 20 years ago. My mother, she's my biggest fan. I love her and adore her. And they were fantastic parents until they were stressed. Once they were stressed, then they reverted back to their earliest blueprints. And they were children of alcoholics. My adoptive mom, her father had a heart attack in front of her when she was 9 years old and he died. No one ever talked about that. My dad's father was shot in a bar. My dad went on to Vietnam, came back with severe post-traumatic stress disorder. They were both parentified. My mom was the oldest daughter of a sibling group of 10. My dad was the oldest son of a sibling group of 9. And so they were parentified. They didn't have a childhood. They basically were the parents to their siblings, which, from a survival standpoint, it happens. Your parents, your moms, my grandmas are working. They're keeping a roof over everyone's head, keeping food in their mouths. So my parents end up being parentified, and what that does to you fundamentally is it just removes your ability to be emotionally present. So my
That's
parents,
me.
yeah,
I was
well,
parentified.
it's just such a familiar dynamic, and it especially our generation. I'm 53, so our generation of parents who really went through the 40s, the 50s, the 60s with parents who had to survive. So survival was such an important thing. And then you just it's really challenging to give something that you did not get. Now, my parents, because they were parentified, that was probably one of my saving graces. They worked hard. They didn't drink. They didn't smoke. They kept a roof over our head. They kept food on the table. My dad worked in a rock quarry after Vietnam. He worked in a rock quarry for 35 years. He is my core blueprint for hard work. And so they always provided consistent, predictable care for us.
Mhm.
And
Could
it made a big difference.
could I ask a couple of questions?
Sure.
First, you said the only two people that knew were your first mother and her sister. Did
Yes.
you, but I thought your biological
The
father knew.
father.
And
Yeah.
then second
Well,
question, were you a
yeah.
same race adoption or were you
Yes.
okay.
Same race. So
Okay.
my biological father was 18 at the time, and my mother had changed my name. So he knew that I existed, but he could not find me. And so once I met my biological mother, I found out more about him, and I was able to find him 2 weeks later.
Okay.
And so he was, pretty much, I would say, forgotten, but he had always thought maybe I would look him up at some point in time.
Was he
So
happy to see you?
100%.
he was. So he knew. I mean, he knew
Yeah.
18, so young, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Super young.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
he had, so you have siblings. You have older
Yeah.
siblings from your mother, and then you have
Uh-huh.
younger sibling or same
So the
age
thing, the
siblings from
thing,
your father.
it's interesting because the woman who my father got pregnant, we were literally almost the same age. I mean, there were months that separated us. And that son of his had a rare heart condition. He was 6'11". He grew too fast for his valves of his heart
Oh,
to keep up, and so he ended up dying. So it's just a very unique experience. And then on my mom's side, I'm 53. I have a brother who's 54. I had a sister who was 55. She passed away from breast cancer about 8 years ago. And then I have another brother who's 56. So we were all back to back to back.
back to
And
back.
then my father had my sister, my half sister, she's 10 years younger than me. And then I also have a brother and a sister who are 12 and 13. So it's quite a little spectrum when it comes to him, for sure.
That's
12 and
for sure.
13 now?
Yes.
Yeah, he's an older
Yeah.
parent.
I bring them out to my house. They
They're
live
like
in South Carolina. Yeah,
they could be your kids
they could be. They live in South
or
Carolina.
grandkids.
I fly them out here, and they spend the summers with me. So,
That's kind
yeah.
of cool.
So
Yeah.
back to your adoptive family,
Mhm.
were you the first child they adopted? Was it due
Only.
to
Yes.
infertility? Did
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
later have biological? Okay.
No, they could not conceive, and so they adopted me. And my mom said, "When we adopted you, you were smiling," and I believe that that reflects back to that in utero experience. When the biological when the mother is able to feel good about the pregnancy, she's releasing oxytocin. And so
Mhm.
when my biological mother said I loved being pregnant, she just told me everything I needed to know about why I'm who I am today and why I'm here, because that oxytocin overrode all the cortisol. Now, the blessing of my life is that I had a adopted sister and we were not biological. And the contrast is that my adopted sister, she was conceived to a woman who was not married, single mother, who used alcohol, maybe drugs, would have been marijuana during the time. She was 3 months premature. She weighed 3.5 pounds, and she spent the first 3 months of her life in an incubator in the 1970s. So my mom said, when we got you, you were smiling. When we got your sister, she was crying. And so when I talk to people about their early in utero experience, I'm also talking from a framework of very personal experience where my sister's in utero experiences were the complete opposite. Our parents were the same. The home was the same. So people always say, well, what's the difference? You had the same parents, you had the same home. Well, first of all, we had a completely different in utero experience. I had a much more regulated one. She had a much more stressed out one. Then her first 3 months of life, she was fighting for survival. So then she ends up emotionally arrested, because that's what happens when you experience trauma that early. You just get arrested emotionally. And then what would happen is, you think about this moment. You think about the first moment of meeting this baby that you've dreamed of, you've longed for, you've waited. And the first one you get smiles at you. What's that do to your receptors? It immediately just turns them on. There's an immediate oxytocin response. The mirror neurons are mirroring back just love and just soothing and just peace and just happiness and just joy from the very moment. Now imagine you get the next child who you've been waiting for and longing for, and you get her and she's crying and you're smiling and she's crying, and she's probably stiff because she doesn't trust the world. She's overwhelmed. And then you're trying to soothe her and you can't soothe her. And immediately your anxiety shoots up and you think there's something wrong with your parenting style, which there's nothing wrong with you. You've got a stressed out baby. But then you get into this negative feedback loop, and that defined our existence. That defined our existence with our parents. So I always let people know that children who come from adoption and foster care, they have trauma. They have early life trauma. Just it's just innate in us. And then what happens is, the difference between my sister and I, because of our in utero experiences, is I could regulate stress more effectively. Oxytocin is a learned experience in the brain. You have to be taught it. So when the biological mother is eating the right foods and sleeping and not drinking and not smoking, then you're getting this oxytocin response. You're learning oxytocin early, early, early. So you're already able to start balancing your stress. If your biological mother is stressed out, drinking alcohol, completely stressed out, and has you prematurely, there's all kinds of things going on, then your oxytocin response is already stunted. So your cortisol response is going to be high. So then you come into a home and you're a child. So you're going to get stressed out over things. Now, when I could get stressed out, and this is what I always tell people. So my parents, beautiful, loving people. I loved and adored them until they got stressed. When they got stressed, their blueprints got activated. When their blueprints got activated, they parented the way they were parented, which was yelling and hitting and shaming and taking things away. And my dad, being a Vietnam vet with severe post-traumatic stress disorder, his window of tolerance for stress was only so high. And this man worked in a rock quarry 6 days a week. So not only was he exhausted most of the time, but he had all this stress sensitivity. And so then when we would get stressed out, I like to tell parents, an acting out child is a stressed out child. So when we're acting out because we're stressed, they get triggered, go into their parentification of needing to control, suppress, and change. And then what do you do as a parent? Well, you whip, or you yell, or you shame. And then what does that do to the brain of the child? Well, it stresses them out more. Now, I could get a whipping and go to my room, and I could self-regulate. My sister could get a whipping and she'd go to her room and she couldn't self-regulate because she didn't have those early mechanisms. So she would stay stressed, and in her stress, she would be emotionally stunted. So that came out as immaturity. Now, when you take an immature child with hyper responsible, over mature parents, you got a recipe for World War III.
Yeah.
Now, it didn't stop in our home. So from the age of 5, it just got worse.
Brian, really quick, tell
Yeah.
our listeners what you do, really quick, as
I'm a
for-
child behavior expert.
Right.
So
Okay.
so my specialization is in working with the most at-risk, stressed out families
Right.
and their children when they don't know what to do. On average, the families that I've worked with have been in 5 to 7 years of mental health, and the children are on 3 to 5 different medications. So I've worked with the absolute extreme of child, and everything that I do and everything that I teach is informed based on, my life experience. And I've got all the credentials, the bachelor's, the master's, the doctorate, but I don't use any of that stuff because I never learned anything from school. I learned it all after school, and research and studying and personal experience. And so my whole focus is about helping parents and families feel more connected, work through stress, understand that stress and fear is at the root of behavior, and how to create more peaceful homes.
That's
Thank you.
fantastic. So
Yeah.
you were saying at 5 years old, does that mean your sister's 5 years old or you at 5 years old?
Oh, I was a year older than her, so I'm just using 5.
But did
Yeah.
that sort of shaped, and did your parents talk to you both about adoption? Did they
Oh
tell you
yeah,
anything about your parents? Did they know who
they
your parents were?
they didn't know anything, but they had always told us from as early as I can remember that we were adopted. So they
Okay.
didn't know, they didn't have any information. They had very little information.
Were they supportive about
Yeah, I was
your curiosity or questions or anything like that? Or were they
Well,
threatened by it?
I never had any curiosity until I had my first daughter.
Yeah, that's
That was the
common.
first time I had any curiosity. And then that's when I was 21 years old. So I started now. What's interesting is my sister always wanted to know
Mm-hmm.
who her biological family is. And I believe it's because she never felt secure in our home.
I was wondering that, like, if you had
And
two different
I
experiences
I
or
felt secure. Yeah, no, we had night and day
day.
night and day experiences. And the funny thing is I had worse behaviors than my sister.
Oh,
Mm.
really?
100%. I did it. I mean, I was a terror. I mean, I was stealing, setting fires, killing animals, beating up kids,
Wow.
but
Wow.
Really
I could
having it.
I could regulate myself at school. So at school, I was the leader. I made good grades. I was a great athlete. I was the golden child in our home because number one, I never got caught doing what I was doing because I was regulated enough. My sister, she was the immature one, and that clashed with my parents' parentification. So they became hyper focused on her immature behavior. She didn't have nearly I was sneaking out of my home probably from the age of 10 on. Sneaking
So
out,
on the
getting in
face of
all,
it, you were the good adoptee, but
yes,
you were doing all
100%.
this stuff.
I
You
was
were
doing
clearly
all the
having
stuff.
I mean, would you not consider that a trauma response from your relinquishment?
Oh, it's all rooted in
Yeah,
an early traumatic experience of abandonment, rejection, not good enough,
all of it.
attempts to self-soothe.
Yeah.
And so then what happens is the way your early parenting occurs, traditional parenting, the spanking, the consequences, and all the stuff that we do that we think we're doing because we're being responsible parents is only creating more stress. It's only compounding more stress. So even though I grew up believing and feeling that my parents loved me very much, I was still stressed out because they were emotionally absent.
Mm.
There was a minimal affection. There was no I love yous. There was no emotional presence. There was no eye gazing. There was no wrestling and holding and all the things that a child needs to be able to regulate. So on the opposite side of that, you do the best you can and you try to self-regulate. Well, I found self-regulation in a dopamine rush and adrenaline, sneaking out of my house at night and walking the streets in the middle of the night. But I was smart enough to be quiet.
Mm.
So and not be gone for 2 hours. My sisters tried to sneak out of the house and she would fall out of the house.
I'm curious though, you say your parents were good parents, great parents, and yet you're saying they didn't look you in the eyes. There was no I love you.
I
How
mean,
do you reckon how do you
how
put those two things
how
together?
common
They
is
put a
that?
roof on your head? I mean,
No, how common is that in our society that we can be physically present and emotionally absent?
That's
right,
my
but
my husband's parents.
That's the majority of our upbringing because our parents were not raised with emotional connection. So few were because parents were out trying to survive and trying to create survival opportunities. So parents that show up for you, parents that feed you, they clothe you, they do love you, they show up for all your events. They're physically present doesn't mean they are emotionally present. And then when they get stressed, now they revert back to their old blueprints and alls they know to do because alls they've experienced is hitting and yelling. But guess what? Every family in the little town I grew up in was hitting and yelling because that was the common way to parent your children. The difference is I was adopted and I had a trauma sensitive brain. My sister had a trauma sensitive brain. So, and I say this to schools all the time 70% of the children in your classroom, you can use all these common behavioral approaches. Nothing's changed. We're doing the same crazy stuff that we've done for literally for generations. Nothing has changed. We just changed it used to be, it was the, dunce chair, and then it was putting your nose in the naughty corner, and then it became timeout. Nothing changes. The
Right.
name just changes, and we don't realize the whole time that just those mechanisms, those tools, those strategies just stress children more. But the 70% of children who had, decent upbringings, who didn't have early trauma, those children can regulate through those stress inducing practices. So then it leads the adults to think that it works. Those things
Right.
don't work. Those children can just regulate their brains.
I used to teach middle school and I saw a lot of that.
Yeah.
A lot of families that still did corporal punishment, a lot of shaming by teachers. It's very common. But one thing you brought up is the sibling thing. I was just listening yesterday to the Gabor Mate. I don't know if I'm saying it
Yeah,
correctly,
it
but when
is.
he talks about you
Yes.
can grow up in the same home, and you do grow up in the same home, Sarah with her siblings, me with my sibling, you with your sibling, and have totally different parents and totally different experiences, right?
Completely different.
And that is the case.
Mhm.
And I'm glad you're saying that because we know people who are both adopted and have had completely different experiences too, within their own home.
It all comes down to vibration.
Mm,
And when you're stressed, you're sending off a negative vibration.
hmm.
And when you're not stressed, you send off a loving vibration. So my parents, they could look at me, they would be happy, to see me. They may not
Mm,
hug me. May not be able to say I love you all the time, but I knew they were happy and I could be happy to go see them. My
hmm.
sister, they were not, and she was not. They were all stressed out with one another for years, for years. And what starts as a little bit of stress at 5 and getting a spanking at 5, by the time you're 10, you're getting full out whippings and getting yelled at and being called a dummy and a dodo. By the time you're 15, it is no longer spanking, it is a fight. So my sister left home at 15. Before she was 18, she had already been in and out of jail. And my
Mm,
mom said it was so bad with your sister. I felt so helpless at one point. I thought about hitting her in the head with a hammer. The funny story about that is that when we were two, when I was 3 and my sister was 2, and we were in daycare, a kid did hit her in the head with a hammer. My sister
Okay.
never caught a break. She never caught a break. And because she was so stressed out, and because my parents were so stressed out, well, how do you think it worked out in my extended family?
Right.
And then my sister would go to school. How do you think it worked out in school? If you're emotionally arrested, you're not going to be able to relate to kids your same age. And then you're probably not going to be able to do your work the same way other kids do. So pretty soon, everywhere my sister looked, there was a negative vibration. And everywhere I looked, there was a positive one.
Is
I
she
experienced
still around?
That's
no,
what
my
I thought.
sister was killed in a car wreck 7 years
Oh,
ago after
mm.
after a 2 year stint in prison, and she was just starting to get her life back together. And she went to her. She had one of my. I have two nephews and a niece, and my mom raised my oldest nephew, and then the youngest two were in a foster placement with my sister's
Mm.
friend, which worked out well. But she went to his 7 year old birthday. But he just graduated from college, by the way.
Oh,
She went to his 7 year old birthday party, and on the way back, it was an ice storm, and a truck slid across the highway and hit her head on. So she
she
was
never
37 years old.
she
What a
never caught a
tragedy.
break. And
Yeah.
do you tell your her children, so those are her children, do you tell them about what you, I mean, obviously, because they're older now, what you've learned and what their mother went through, so they can kind of see their lives a little bit?
Oh yeah. They know what Uncle Brian does. Yeah.
Yeah,
We've
I'm
had
Did
sure.
did
lots of
she
conversations.
did she ever find her biological
Yeah.
family? Oh, she never did. So
Yeah.
what was your path then to doing the
Hmm.
search, and how did you find them? So you said you didn't get curious till you were 21, but then earlier you said you didn't find her till you were 37.
Yeah.
So what happened in those
A long,
intervening 16 years?
a long journey. Well, at 21, I found out that you could write to the state of Oklahoma for your de-identified birth records. So I did that. I got that back. That's when I first learned about my mom, and I first learned about my dad. He was supposedly from Washington D.C. There was kind of a little discombobulated, but for whatever reason, that was enough at that point. And I put that little thick envelope in a filing cabinet.
So you were
And
curious. You were curious.
I was curious. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was only the non-identifying information.
It's just the
Right.
non-identified
Okay.
information. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I just knew she was 5'4", and it said he was 6'11". Turns out it was his son that was 6'11". My dad was 6'4" though. So he's tall. I'm 6'1".
Yeah.
I wish I could have got a little more of that height, but
Well, at least you didn't get to 5'4". I mean,
yeah, right.
Right? That's, yeah, funny.
Uh, the funny thing about that is my mom was a little bow-legged lady, and when I was born, I was bow-legged. And so I don't, you guys know what bow-legged means?
Yes.
Okay, so I was so bow-legged that they ended up breaking my legs and
Oh,
casting them and then putting me in a brace, which
ugh,
was another traumatic thing,
another.
yeah.
I have a
you know?
friend who went
But
through that. It's terrible.
but they did that during that time.
They
And
did.
the even it's not funny, but the stranger story than that is I eventually had a little cousin who was born, and she was so bow-legged, she walked on the sides of her feet. They never did anything. And she's got the
Oh,
straightest legs. She got the straightest
huh.
legs now as an adult. So um, anyway, I put that little thick envelope in a filing cabinet. Didn't look at it for another 10 years. I happened to be watching a Maury Povich show one day, and someone said they were talking about, all the crazy Maury Povich stuff.
Yeah, of
And,
course.
and there was an adoption commercial. And so we can help you find your biological family. So I called the number and wrote off, and they sent me something. And I don't know if I spent any money. I think maybe I spent $700. And the town I grew up in, Mountain View, Oklahoma, was 2,000 people. And there was a guy in Mountain View, Oklahoma. His name was Norm Russell. He was 6'11". Norm ended up becoming the judge of the county that I grew up in. Well, everyone knew Norm because he was 6'11". He ended up becoming the judge. And so I guess the adoption search that I had signed up for sent a letter to Kiowa County where Norm was the judge. I don't know how Norm got my address. He may have called my mom. It was that kind of town.
Hmm.
Everyone knew everyone. Well, he sent me a letter with the little brochure he had received from them, and he said, "Bryan, if you want to know any information," he said, "just call me." And I looked at it, I was like, okay. and I promptly stuck it back in the filing cabinet.
You have a judge who's willing to help you. That's
I
so
had a judge who just said, "Hey, whatever you want, just give me a call." And I just stuck in the filing cabinet, and it was another
interesting.
probably 5 years, 5 or 6 years, that I happened to be walking down to my mailbox. I walked down to the end of my mailbox, getting my mail, and I'm standing there, and I happened to look up, and I looked. I was still living in Oklahoma at the time, and I looked to the east, and I said, I was born about 2 hours away. And I said, I probably need to go figure this out. So I happened to have a cousin who was a school administrator in Eufaula, Oklahoma, which is right next to Muskogee, Oklahoma. And she asked me to come speak to her group of teachers. And so I told my mom, hey, I'm going to go speak in Eufaula. It's 10 minutes from Muskogee. Why don't you come with me? And afterwards, we'll go see if I can find anything out about myself. So we drove, I did the lecture, then we drove over to Muskogee. I went to, we're just driving around. It's the weirdest thing. It was just like driving around. And Muskogee's a pretty good size, 10, 15,000 people. And I don't know, just feeling like maybe something's going to jump out. And so then I went to the local library and I was just kind of looking around. I didn't have not a clue what I was looking for. My dad had always said that he knew that I was referred to as baby knight. Well, I was not a knight. I was a craft. My mother was a craft, but she had changed my last name to Knight so my father couldn't find me. So
Oh,
that's all I knew. And so I was standing around in this little library, and then I was walking out, and a little silver haired old lady at the desk said, is there anything I can help you with? I said, you know what? I was born here. I was adopted. I was just kind of looking around, maybe trying to find out, a little bit of who I'm connected to. And she said, well, let me write this number down for you. I know a lady who does this as a ministry. You should give her a call. And so she gave me the number. And as we were driving out of town, I called the lady. She answered. We talked. She said, sure, I'd be happy to go give her a little bit of information. It was probably a 5 minute conversation. And we hung up. And then about 2 weeks later, she said, I think I'm pretty close to finding your mom. And I think she lives in Lawton, Oklahoma. Lawton was 45 minutes from where I grew up. We used to go to Lawton all the time. And so she gave me a little information. And then I went online, was looking around and found a woman who had 3 kids, which was consistent with my birth records. And then about 5 days after that, the lady called me back. She said, I've got her phone number. I said, well, great. And so I called and I left a message. I said, hey, my name's Bryan Post. I'm a social worker from Tulsa. I was living up in Tulsa at the time. I'm a social worker from Tulsa. I just want to, I had some questions for you. If you could give me a call back, please. And so she called me back and she's like, who is this? Like I just said.
yeah.
And that was it. And 2 weeks later, I found my birth father. I found his
Oh,
name.
that's fast.
Yeah, yeah, no, it all came. I mean, it all came right together. I got his
Wow.
name.
Did she tell you his name? I mean, she
Yes,
was
yeah, yeah.
okay.
She told me everything, and then I found a picture of him on a reunion.com site for Muskogee, and he was holding a baby, which would have been my brother, and I knew it was him as soon as I seen it because it looked just like myself and my daughter.
Wow.
And he was wearing a tie-dye shirt, and I was like, I see that Grateful Dead back there. So
Ah,
I used to wear a lot of tie-dye,
yeah.
and I knew it was him. And so
Wow.
I was able to send him an email, and then we had a phone call, and then a couple weeks later, I was lecturing out in South Carolina or Baltimore or somewhere, and he drove and came to one of my lectures. That was the first time we met.
Huh. That's a
Wow.
very like just everything so quickly. And how did you feel like when you were with them? Did you feel because I know you're very you love your parents. They were good to you.
Yeah.
How did you feel when you met your biology? Like how was
Oh,
that?
I think it's a part of my wiring as an adopted child of really being pretty irreverent and not I don't worry a lot about what other people think about my life because this is my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I said that to my mom, who like I said, I love and adore my mom. She's my biggest fan. She's
Mm-hmm.
coming here. I've got 7 kids. My granddaughter's having her 1 year birthday party this
Oh.
weekend. So my mom's on the way here. And I told her, I said, look, this is my story.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to feel however you need to feel about it, but I love you. You're my mom. There's no one else that's going to replace you as my mom. You're always going to be my mom. But this is my story and it's important to me. So you can be supportive and come along for the ride. My mom
Yeah.
came with me the first time I met my biological mother.
Oh, she did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and or you can sit and be upset. Well, however you decide, I love you, and life goes on. And so that's how I pursued it. And the reality is, I love my bio parents. I honor them and I respect them because they gave me life. My biological mother, and I tell her on every birthday and every Mother's Day, thank you so much because you did not have to bring me into this world and you did not have to sacrifice a part of your heart to give me to other parents, but you did, and I love you and I appreciate you and I respect you for that. I honor you for that. And we talk maybe once a month, we'll text, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe once every 6 months I'll see her. And here's the funny thing is I feel closer to my siblings than I actually do my bio parents.
Mm.
Like we have the connection of family, but it's like my siblings, there's just something unique there. And we don't even talk a lot. I mean, I bring my sister on my dad's side. I bring her with my younger brother and sister every summer. So that's her one vacation she gets to come hang out. And we get to hang out and it's beautiful. And then I see my other 2 brothers, probably once or twice a year.
That's cool. I think that's
Mm.
quite common to have the sibling connection. My
Interesting.
biological father got somebody pregnant also right before my mother. So I have a
Mhm.
sister 2 months older, but I don't know her.
Oh, cool.
I've never met her, but it's
Yeah.
interesting. I'm like, oh, that's just cool.
Yeah, I'm close to my.
Yeah, you're close.
Mhm. Yeah.
Just
Wow,
naturally.
Brian, what a great story. And I love your vibe and your,
Mm-hmm.
as you said, you put out that positive vibration, what you get
Yes.
back. And
Yeah.
that's absolutely true in life. And I'm so sorry about
Absolutely.
your sister.
Yeah, me
Mm.
That's
too.
she really that's just a tragic life with a tragic ending.
It really is. And at the same time, my sister lived her life to the fullest. Now, it may have been selling drugs and doing all the other craziness she was doing, but my sister was happy. She was happy with herself and she just went full out and she was beginning to get her life together. And I'll tell you who was more affected by my sister's death than anyone, and it's my mother. My mother said the night before my sister's funeral, she said, "You know what your sister needed but never got?" And I said, "What's that?" She said, "Understanding. We
Oh,
never understood her." And it's so true. The
yeah.
adopted child and the foster child are probably two of the most understood populations that exist.
You mean misunderstood?
Misunderstood, yeah.
Misunderstood populations that exist because people think, and there's this message that's out there that you just take this baby and you give them a nice home, everything's okay.
Yeah.
Well,
And
they
it's not
think of them as
okay.
with infants in particular, thinking of them as a blank slate.
Mm.
Yes,
And
yes,
that just isn't true,
That's
as
pretty
we now know.
it's pretty self-reflective of your mother to come with that. She needed
yeah,
understanding. She's come a
yeah,
long way, obviously, in that.
yeah. She has and she's still really sad about that.
Of
Well, I
course.
can
That's
imagine probably
heartbreaking.
guilt as well,
Oh yes, oh
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
Wow. Well,
And then
thank
I
you,
tell you what,
Brian.
she's learned a lot. She's learned a lot from listening
I
to
was
me and
gonna
being
say, I
willing
bet
to
she
listen to
listened
me.
from you.
And
And
Yeah.
what
so,
you do for a living
Right.
has
absolutely,
probably enlightened her with looking
yes,
back and saying, "Oh,
Of
maybe,
course, right?
had
yeah,
things been different, or if I'd known more, or any of
Mm.
those things that,
sure.
And
yeah,
thank you
well,
to
better late than
speaking.
never, right?"
That's it.
thank you to
There's,
speaking to the utero situation, because
Mm-hmm.
that we don't
course.
get that often on the podcast, and it's nice to really hear it from somebody who studies it
Yes.
and validate it, because people feel this way and don't always know that that's, a real thing. So,
Oh, it's such a real thing. I just said to someone the other day, they were talking about their husband's anxiety. And I said, that's just a birth imprint. And she
mhm,
said, really? I said, yeah. I said, his mom was probably really stressed out when she was pregnant with him. She's like, oh my gosh, yes. Because we don't realize how impactful those
mhm,
9 months are. And not only that, but the DNA, the
mhm,
encoding that happens, and whatever that biological mother is feeling, you carry that. I still carry that in my brainstem. The
mhm.
brainstem stores every memory. From the fourth week after conception, the fetus starts to develop the mechanisms to hear. By the second trimester, the fetus is capable of psychological processing. That 9 months is a real thing,
Yeah.
and we
My mother didn't
carry.
know she was pregnant. I wonder.
Yeah, I was wondering about that, Sarah, that too.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
did not know she was pregnant. So I'm so curious how
Yeah,
that.
that would be interesting.
Yeah,
That
what
would be
that's
interesting.
interesting, right? Like, was she
Yeah,
eating
when
well? What was she doing? Was she
she was
young?
horseback riding and swimming. I remember because when I read the social worker notes,
Yeah.
she was, and after having me, and she was
Yeah.
like, "Oh my gosh, did I harm the baby? I was swimming all summer and horseback riding." So she didn't know. So she was living a normal life.
Well, it also sounds like she was probably happy in
She too
doing
was
in
adopted, though. She had her own traumas and was not close to her adoptive parents. So
yeah, okay.
there's that mixed
So
in.
maybe disconnected from her body as
I
well.
think so.
Very
I think
Huh.
interesting.
so.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. So,
It's
well, this is,
fascinating. I
It
love
is
it.
fascinating.
it
It's totally
really is. Now I'm
fascinating.
going to go do some deep dives on this later today.
That's great.
Brian, it was
Yeah.
so great to meet you. Thank you so
This was
much for
wonderful.
coming
My
on, and
pleasure and my honor. And thank you
Thank
all
you. It's our
for
honor.
everything that you do.
Thank
thank
you.
you for what you do. Really
Yes,
like
thank you.
changing the next generation. It's so
Yes,
important.
it really is. Thanks,
Yeah.
Brian.
Thanks,
You're
Brian.
welcome.
Well, he was fantastic. What
Yeah.
a positive human, right?
Yeah.
And
Doing great work too, and really taking his knowledge and educating people, and also having the first person personal experience is
right.
huge. I'm sure that really helps when you're talking to, I like how he talks to schools. I could see him
Mm-hmm.
speaking at a school, and just even the work he's done with his adopted mom. Look how she's knowledgeable now. I mean, it's so sad his sister just breaks my heart.
I know. Just
Another casualty.
another casualty. Mm-hmm. And just how he is, it's a slow change, but these, wherever you can take your experience to help others,
Yes.
and that will, has the ripple effect eventually, right? The more, the
Yes.
better someone learns now, then the next generation and the next and the next.
Yes.
It's incremental change
Yeah.
sometimes is,
And he helps a lot of families. I saw in his bio on in foster care. So people are dealing with kids coming to their homes, very stressed out, and a lot of people have that good intention, when they're fostering. But you're like, whoa, you need to
mm-hmm.
understand they're coming. What he said, you're coming from trauma. If you're adopted, you're from foster care. You're coming from
You're
trauma.
coming from trauma. We are the most misunderstood people, he said, on the planet. And
Yeah,
I think that's true.
I do
And,
too.
when especially us, right? It's our, not especially, but um, when you become an adult and you've just learned to cope with it your whole life, and then you might hear, "What are you talking about? You're fine." That you always, but
Yeah,
just if you present well on the outside,
yeah,
people assume, get over it,
yeah. Look at his
Um,
teenage years. He presented quite well. Great
right.
student, great athlete, totally doing horrible stuff on the side because of that trauma.
Yeah, exactly.
Oof.
Well, what do we say?
Another great episode.
Another great episode. See you next time.
See you next time. Thanks so much for listening today.
If you want to reach us, you can find us at our website, adoptionthemakingofme.com. And you can also go to patreon.com to find us. And we're on all the socials. Thank you.